The first thing Princess Celari learned about her human husband was that silence followed him, not the uncomfortable kind, not the fearful kind. It was the sort of silence that made rooms settle as if the air itself slowed down to listen. In the grand halls of the Vierk's dominion, where nobles shimmered with crystal armor and voices rang sharp with authority, Elia's ward moved like a calm tide through sharp stone. He did not glow. He did not hum with energy. He did not bear claws or spines or weapons grown from bone. He simply walked. Celari had been raised among warriors. Her people believed strength should be seen, proven, displayed. A ruler who hid power was considered weak. A consort who lacked it was decoration at best, a liability at worst. That was what the court thought Elia's was, a decoration. The marriage had been arranged to seal a trade and research alliance between the Vierk's dominion and the human coalition. Humans were new to this part of the galaxy. Fast learners, yes, clever engineers, but physically unimpressive, biologically soft, and culturally strange. They wore their dead in memories instead of monuments. They fought wars and then wrote rules to prevent them from happening again. Strange people. Celari remembered the first time she saw Elia's clearly, not during the ceremony when lights and voices blurred into tradition. Not when vows were exchanged in 3 languages and one shared silence. It was later, in the quiet garden above the capital spire. She had expected him to be nervous. Humans were known to feel emotions strongly. Fear, joy, sorrow, they wore them openly. But Elia stood at the edge of the platform, looking out over the floating city with steady eyes. His hands were folded behind his back, posture straight but not stiff. "You may speak freely here," Celari had said, more out of courtesy than concern. "I know," he replied. His voice was calm, warm, not submissive, not proud. That unsettled her more than fear would have. Since then, she watched him closely. At court gatherings, Elia stood beside her throne, never ahead, never hidden. He wore human formal clothing, dark fabric, clean lines, no display of wealth. At his side hung an object that confused many nobles, a sword. It was not powered, not glowing, not alive, just metal. The blade rested in a simple sheath, worn but cared for. It was ceremonial, the diplomats said, a cultural symbol, something humans carried to remember old times, old wars. More than once, Celari noticed nobles staring at it with open amusement. Some whispered, some laughed softly, thinking she could not hear. A blade without energy, a weapon without teeth, harmless. Elias never reacted, he listened. During councils, when voices rose and tempers flared, Elias watched the speakers instead of the displays. He noted who interrupted, who hesitated, who avoided certain words. He asked questions later, privately, always polite. Why did Councillor Wren insist on that clause? The Vierk's court dismissed him because he did not demand attention, because he did not challenge anyone, because he smiled gently when mocked. One noble, Lord Kethrix, was particularly vocal. "Princess," he had said during one gathering, his crystal crest shimmering with mockery, "your consort carries a weapon from a time before logic. Should we fear it biting us?" Celari felt irritation rise, sharp and instinctive. She opened her mouth to respond. Elias spoke first. "It does not bite," he said mildly. "It waits." "Why do you let them speak to you that way?" she asked as they walked through the private corridors of the palace. The lights dimmed as they passed, responding to her presence. Elias considered the question. "They are afraid of what they understand," he said. "They laugh at what they don't. It tells me where they are not looking." Legal frameworks were twisted. Invitations arrived with hidden threats beneath polite words. The court grew tense. Champions were displayed during gatherings, massive beings shaped by evolution and war. Claws gleamed. Energy fields crackled. Strength was shown openly, deliberately. The message was clear. We are powerful. You are not. Celari watched Elias during these displays. He never flinched. Never leaned back. His eyes followed movements with interest, not fear. Once she caught him watching a duel demonstration between 2 alien warriors. No blows landed. It was ceremonial, controlled. Still, the force behind each movement was terrifying. "What do you think?" she asked him quietly. "They are very strong," Elias said. She waited for more. "And," she prompted. "And they move like they expect everyone to move the same way." Humans did not spar like others did. Their bodies required protection, assistance. He stood alone in the center of the room. The sword was in his hands, not drawn, just held. His eyes were closed. He breathed slowly, evenly, each breath measured, each movement minimal. He adjusted his stance slightly, shifting weight with quiet precision. Celari watched from the doorway, unseen. There was no aggression in him, no hunger for conflict, but there was focus, deep focus. the kind she had only seen in her people before battle. She realized then that Elias did not treat the sword as a weapon. He treated it as a responsibility. Later, when she asked him about human weapons, he did not speak of conquest or victory. "We learned early," he said, "that power without control destroys the one who holds it first." Others suggested the marriage was symbolic only, that Elias should not attend high councils. Silari defended him each time, but she began to notice something else. When Elias entered a room, conversations changed, not louder, quieter, more careful. Some nobles avoided his gaze, some studied him too closely. The pressure from the rival alliance reached its peak during the Grand Convocation, a gathering meant to resolve disputes peacefully. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber. Power hummed in the air. Silari sat tall on her throne. Elias stood beside her. A representative from the rival alliance stepped forward, voice smooth, words sharp. They spoke of dominance without using the word, of order, of inevitability. They questioned the Dominion's ability to protect its interests. They questioned its alliances. And finally, they questioned its choice of consort. "A ruler reflects their strength through those they keep closest," the representative said. "And strength, princess, must be visible." Silari felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She prepared to answer, to defend, to command. Elias moved, just one step forward, not challenging, not aggressive, simply present. He rested one hand lightly on the hilt of his sheathed sword. He did not draw it. He did not need to. The chamber fell silent. Something shifted, not fear, recognition. Silari felt it then, clear and sharp. Her husband was not harmless. He was contained, and the galaxy had not yet learned the difference. The silence that followed Elias' single step did not break quickly. No alarms sounded. No guards moved. Yet something unseen had shifted in the great chamber, like a line crossed without noise. The representatives from other worlds watched the human with new interest, their expressions no longer amused. The rival envoy tilted their heads slightly. "Is your consort attempting to speak for you, princess?" "As do all who stand in this hall." As the delegates departed, Silari sensed eyes following Elias more than her throne. That night the palace corridors felt heavier. Silari dismissed her attendants earlier than usual. She needed quiet. When she entered the shared chamber, Elias was already there, seated near the window that overlooked the city's slow orbit. "You felt it," she said. He nodded. "Yes." Among her people, control was maintained through visible strength, through force shown but rarely used. Elias' action had not shown strength in the same way, yet it had worked. "The court will not like this," she said. "Some already question your place. Sometimes they lead to understanding." Polite suggestions were made that the human consort should focus on cultural exchange rather than governance. Silari rejected each suggestion. Still, she could feel the strain. The court was testing not just Elias, but her resolve. One afternoon, Lord Kethrix approached her during a private gathering. "Princess," he said, voice smooth as polished stone, "your alliance with humanity has value. But symbols can become distractions." "Just a fraction, enough." "No," he said, "I accuse perception." "End this. When you remember what you are capable of, you choose carefully." When diplomacy stalled, a symbolic contest could be called to determine moral authority. No bloodshed, no death, a test of representation. The court buzzed with excitement and tension. They expected Silari to name a champion from among her warriors. She did not. She asked for time. In private, her advisors urged her to choose strength that could be seen, something impressive, something undeniable. "A human will humiliate us," one said. "He is fragile," said another. "He is untrained," said a third. Silari listened. Then she dismissed them all. That night she went to Elias. "They are calling for a representative," she said. "A symbolic contest." This was the next step. "They will be forced to reconsider many assumptions," Elias said. She looked away, conflicted. "I do not want you harmed." The announcement shook the court. Whispers erupted into open argument. Protests were lodged. Objections raised. Legal texts were cited. But the rules were clear. Any recognized consort could stand as representative. Elias qualified. On the day of the contest, the chamber was filled beyond capacity. Representatives from dozens of species watched closely. The rival alliance's champion stood tall, armored in living crystal, radiating confidence. Elias walked in quietly beside Silari. He wore no armor, only simple clothing. The sword rested at his side. Some laughed openly, some frowned, some leaned forward. Silari felt her hearts beat faster. She kept her expression calm. The officiator spoke the ancient words explaining the purpose. No blood. No killing. The goal was demonstration of resolve and capability. The rival champion bowed with theatrical grace. Elias returned the gesture respectfully, then he reached for his sword. A ripple went through the chamber. Selari held her breath. Elias did not draw it. He placed it gently on the ground between them. A murmur spread. The rival champion looked confused. "You lay down your weapon." Selari realized then that Elias was not breaking tradition. He was redefining it. The test began. It was not a fight, not truly. It was a measured exchange of movement, balance, and intent. Elias did not rush. He did not overpower. He anticipated. Each time the rival champion attempted to force advantage, Elias shifted just enough to deny it. No strikes landed. No damage was done. Minutes passed, then longer. The champion grew frustrated. Elias remained calm. At last, the rival champion stepped back, breathing hard. "I concede," they said quietly. Shock rippled through the hall. Elias retrieved his sword and returned it to its sheath. He bowed, that was all. Selari stood slowly, awe and understanding washing over her. The court was silent, not because of fear. Because of realization, the human had not won by strength. He had won by restraint. And in that moment, the galaxy began to understand that humanity's greatest weapon was not what it carried, but what it chose not to use. The days after the contest did not return to normal. They could not. Word spread faster than official records ever could. Not through announcements or declarations, but through quiet conversations, altered behavior, and eyes that followed Elias wherever he went. The rival alliance withdrew its formal pressure without explanation, citing the need for internal reassessment. No one believed that was the full truth, but no one challenged it either. Selari watched the change from her throne. Where once Elias had been ignored, now he was observed. Where once nobles spoke freely around him, now they measured their words. The laughter was gone, so were the careless insults. Something deeper had replaced them. Caution. Elias noticed it too. "They're afraid," Selari said one evening as they walked the upper gardens. "Yes," Elias replied. "But not of me." Unofficially, it was to decide what to do with the human problem. Selari entered the chamber with steady confidence. Elias walked beside her, posture unchanged, sword still at his side. The sight of it no longer brought laughter. Instead, it brought silence. Lord Kethrix was among the first to speak. "What occurred was unprecedented," he said carefully. "The contest was not won by force, but by interpretation." Kethrix's crest shimmered. "You speak as if your species has mastered governance." Not because Elias dominated the room, but because he did not try to. The council adjourned without resolution. That night, Selari found it difficult to rest. Her thoughts returned again and again to the contest, to the way Elias had moved not to win, but to end conflict without escalation. She found him in the same training chamber as before. This time, the door was open. "You are awake," he said without turning. "So are you," she replied. "I often am." It was difficult knowing. They expected me to prove something I had no desire to prove. Some hailed the outcome as a triumph of diplomacy. Others called it dangerous. A few quietly suggested that humanity was hiding capabilities that should be limited. Requests for human advisors increased, not for soldiers or engineers, but for mediators, analysts, and strategists. Humans declined most politely. "We don't intervene unless invited," their representatives said. That alone unsettled many powers. The rival alliance sent a message weeks later. It was brief and formal. They acknowledged the outcome of the contest and expressed interest in further dialogue with human participation. Selari read it twice. "They are adapting," she said. "They always do," Elias replied. "You sound unsurprised." Yet beneath the surface, calm tension brewed. Not all in the Dominion were willing to accept change. One night, Selari received a discreet warning from one of her most trusted aides. "There are voices," the aide said quietly. "They speak of removing the variable." "They may try to isolate you," she said, "or worse. Then we face it together." "The role exists to strengthen unity," she said, "not to preserve comfort. You believe strength must look familiar to be safe." Afterward, Selari felt the exhaustion settle deep into her core. "They will keep trying," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "Does that tire you?" He answered them honestly, about wars that left scars, about victories that felt hollow, about lessons paid for dearly. He did not glorify, he did not dramatize, he simply explained. Slowly, the tone of the court shifted. Strength was still respected, but control began to be admired. One evening, Selari stood beside Elias on the balcony overlooking the city. "You have changed them," she said. "No," Elias replied. They changed themselves. I only stood still long enough for them to see it. Below them, the lights of the Dominion glowed steadily. The galaxy was watching, and humanity, quiet and contained, had taken its place not as a force to fear, but as one to respect. The warning came without ceremony. No dramatic alarms, no flashing lights. Just a quiet message delivered through secure channels, carrying a tone that Selari recognized immediately. Urgency wrapped in restraint. She read it once, then again, feeling the weight settle behind her eyes. A neutral system near the Dominion's outer trade lanes had called for mediation. Not arbitration, not negotiation. Mediation. That meant tension had already passed the point where words alone were enough, but no one yet wanted to admit it. The rival alliance was involved. So were two minor powers whose borders overlapped in ways that maps never showed clearly enough. Ships were gathering, not attacking, just gathering, too close, too many. The galaxy was holding its breath. "They are asking for us," Selari said quietly. Elias stood beside her, hands folded, listening. "They are asking for you," he corrected. "I am the variable. And my consort will stand with me." Selari entered the central hall with practiced calm. Elias walked at her side. The sword was there as always, but something had changed. Those who noticed it now did not laugh or whisper. They watched it the way one watches a sealed door, aware of what it kept in, not just what it kept out. The talks began stiffly. Accusations were traded through formal language. Old grievances resurfaced. New interpretations of ancient agreements were presented as undeniable truths. Elias did not speak at first. He observed. He watched how representatives leaned forward when they lied, how their voices tightened when they felt cornered. He listened for what was not said. Selari sensed the tension building, coiling tighter with every passing hour. Then one representative made a mistake. Not a threat, not an insult, an assumption. "Humans advocate restraint," the representative said, voice smooth. "Yet restraint only works when all parties fear escalation." "So what do humans rely on?" the representative asked. "Memory," Elias replied, "and consequence." But the line had been crossed. Representatives stiffened. Voices sharpened. Security forces adjusted their stances. Selari rose, ready to speak. Elias stepped forward first, just one step. It was enough. "Before anyone reacts," he said calmly, "I ask permission to speak plainly." "Every one of you believes escalation will strengthen your position," Elias continued. "You believe the other side will yield if pressure increases." Easy words from a species protected by distance. It did not hum. It caught the light, simply clean metal reflecting many faces at once. Gasps followed, not panic, recognition. "This weapon is older than any treaty in this room," Elias said. "It was designed for killing. Humans became very good at that. We learned how easy it was. I brought it to remind you that once lines are crossed, they are rarely uncrossed." Slowly, tension eased, not vanished. Eased, agreements were revised, borders clarified, oversight established. No one claimed victory, but everyone stepped back. When the talks ended, the fleets dispersed. The crisis passed without battle. Word spread quickly, not of threats, not of force, of a human who drew a sword and did not use it. Back in the Dominion, reactions were mixed. Some praised the outcome. Others whispered of danger, of precedent, of a human influence growing too strong. Selari listened. Elias remained calm. One evening, as they stood together in the quiet of their private chambers, Selari finally spoke the question that had been building. "You drew the sword," she said. "Why then?" "Because they needed to understand that restraint is a choice, not a limitation." Human representatives were invited to councils where they had never been before. Not as enforcers, not as rulers, as reminders of consequence, of memory, of what happens when restraint is abandoned. Selari watched as her people adapted slowly, carefully. Strength remained important, but it was no longer enough on its own. One night she stood beside Elias on the balcony once more. "You have changed the balance," she said. "No," he replied. "I reminded it why it exists." It feared the idea of a species that had mastered violence well enough to put it away. And that fear, Selari realized, was what kept the peace. Time changed the story in ways no single moment ever could. Years passed, measured not by battles or crises, but by meetings that ended calmly, borders that stayed quiet, and decisions made without raised voices. The galaxy did not become peaceful. It became careful. That difference mattered. Princess Selari ruled longer than many expected. Her reign was remembered not for expansion or conquest, but for balance. Under her leadership, the Vierk's dominion gained influence not through fear, but through trust. Other powers learned that when the Dominion spoke, it did so with weight earned through restraint. Elia's ward remained at her side. He never took a formal title beyond consort. He never commanded fleets or issued decrees, yet his presence shaped outcomes more deeply than many rulers ever did. He was invited to councils across systems, not as a negotiator, but as a listener. People spoke differently when he was in the room, not because he demanded it, because they remembered. Stories spread as they always do. Some were exaggerated, some softened. Some turned the human into something almost mythical, a warrior who never fought, a judge who never sentenced, a blade that decided the fate of empires without being used. Elias corrected none of them. Myths tell people what they fear, he once told Selari. Truth only matters to those who are ready to hear it. The sword remained at his side. It aged slowly, carefully maintained. New generations of nobles grew up seeing it not as a weapon, but as a symbol. Teachers used it as an example when explaining the Dominion's place in the galaxy. This, they would say, is what restraint looks like. Not to copy it, but to understand the cost of learning too late. The phrase, human restraint, entered common speech, meaning power held back by choice. Not everyone approved. There were always those who argued that fear was still fear, no matter how quietly it was applied. That humanity's presence shaped decisions unfairly. That peace built on memory of destruction was fragile. Elias listened to these arguments with the same calm he always had. "You're not wrong," he told one critic. "Peace is fragile. That's why it must be handled carefully." Time marked her people more gently than humans, but it still marked them. Elias remained much the same, his human lifespan extended through shared technology, though he never sought full immortality. "Why not?" Selari asked him one night, when the stars outside their chamber felt closer than usual. "Because endings matter," Elias said. "They give meaning to restraint." Elias knew when the weight of leadership pressed too heavily on her shoulders. When Selari finally chose to step back from the throne, the galaxy watched closely. There were no power struggles, no sudden shifts. The transition was smooth. Her successor sought Elias' counsel. Elias declined formal advisory roles but offered one thing freely: perspective. "Ask not what will strengthen you today," he told the new ruler. "Ask what will haunt you tomorrow." A human saying entered galactic language, translated imperfectly but clearly enough. "We already know where that road goes." "I think it's time," he said. She felt a sudden ache. Time for what? Carried so it would not need to be used. He watched as conflicts were delayed, then resolved, then sometimes avoided entirely. He knew it would not last forever. No peace does. But he also knew something had changed permanently. The idea that strength must be proven through destruction had been challenged, not by force, but by example. On a quiet evening, as the light from distant stars painted the room in soft colors, Elias sat beside Selari one last time. "Do you think they will remember?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "Not me, the lesson." "That the most dangerous species is not the one that seeks war," he said. "It is the one that survived it, learned from it, and chose something better." Yet even in her grief, she saw the proof of his legacy everywhere. In restraint, in patience, in the careful way power was handled. Humanity did not become legends because of what they destroyed. They became legends because of what they refused to. And long after names faded and stories blurred, the galaxy still remembered one simple truth: humans were not harmless, they were disciplined. The alien princess thought her human husband was harmless, until he drew his sword HFY Sci-fi Story.